Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're listening to this. My name is Yuri Castro, and I'm very happy to be here today with you and to welcome my co host, Marcia Trajano, for the Seeds of Knowledge series. If this is the first time you're tuning into one of our discussions about Spiritism, rest assured that the Spiritist Solitude Center for Spiritual Living releases one of these every first and third Sunday of every month. And today, my co-host Marcia is going to be presenting on a very interesting topic. She's going to be talking about thought and emotions, how to achieve inner harmony. Hello, Marcia. I hope you're doing well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the floor is yours, Marcia. I'm going to go and I'll see you in a little bit.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. And thanks, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you today. And would start our conversation today. Let me put my um, to the next slide, right? I would like to pose the following question to all of us. Have you ever felt consumed by, say, anxiety, even after you achieve something that you really longed for, that you desire deeply? Well, most of us do. And the context by this question that I'm putting us here is because we are going to embark together in a conversation the next few minutes that is inspired by some reflections given to us by Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, and the spiritual author, was wrote this book through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco on the essential relationships between our thoughts and our emotions. The book, with roughly translated, my translation, called Themes of Life and Death. It has not yet been translated into English, so you find it with the the original publication in Portuguese. Um, the small book, in fact, has an even smaller chapter, I would say 3, 4 pages long, on thoughts and emotions, and it caught my attention. The chapter provides some interesting ideas and gives us clarity and tools for examining and achieving that emotional balance and spiritual perspective on our mental well being. Hence, our title for talk today. If we keep on our discussion, I wanted to just bring to you that before I answer the question on anxiety, we should really start by understanding even what is emotion or what are emotions. If we were to define that, and we're talking about a classic dictionary type of definition, at the most basic level, emotions are internal responses, and they can be considered mental response and even physiological reaction to an external and internal stimuli. So, very interesting. It's a response mechanism to something. Emotions actually influence our behavior, our thoughts, our social interactions. And usually, and this is our judgment, we're talking about culturally speaking, mostly Western, postmodern society, right, define those types of emotions as either pleasant, positive, or unpleasant or negative. Some of the emotions that are considered pleasant are joy, love, right? All of the things that makes us smile. Or on the other side of the spectrum, those unpleasant emotions such as fear, anger, sadness. And as such, they are there as a mechanism to send us signals to guide us our actual survival, adaptation, and decision making as individuals, as human beings. Woo, a lot to bring in, but I wanted to introduce somebody that you may not actually be as familiar as other names in Spiritism, but the American psychologist with the best known for his groundbreaking work on emotions as well as just correlated, right? Facial expressions and non-verbal communications, Paul Elkman, he concludes that emotions are actually complex psychological states that involves three distinct components. Number one, it is a subjective experience. So, in so many words, if we were to compare my emotional response to the same thing in relation to, say, Yuri, who was here with me, we may have a vastly different emotional response, right? But he also includes in that psychological state a different component, which is that physiological response we talked about. And finally, the third component is behavioral, or what he calls expressive responses. Those components, examples for that in terms of the subjective experience, or in so many words, the feeling is that internal personal experience of emotion. An example, and I can relate to that in my mind's eye, is I'm walking alone at night, right? And I hear footsteps behind me. Believe me, I've had nightmares about the same state, which is a trigger for my subjective experience of feeling of fear, right? A different one, which would be my physiological response, or other words, my body reaction references how the emotions I'm feeling trigger some physical changes like rapid heart rate, my hormone levels. We're talking about adrenaline or other hormones, sweating in the hands. I'm one of those people that when I'm very afraid, I actually start to sweat in my hands quite copiously. When I'm very angry, another emotional response, I actually cry. So some of us have different physiological response. But another example could be our tachycardia, right? Our heart racing, and again, palm sweating when we are faced with some imminent fear. And finally, the third component, those behavior expressive responsive, which is something that we could call an observable action, refers to how my emotion is shown to you, expressed to you, and usually you can capture that through, for example, my facial expression or even my body language. If I am sad, I end up, close my eyes and my body just closes down. If I'm afraid, there's a sense of I don't know. Let me go to a place that it will be less damaging. Or if I'm angry, then there's this thing of let me prepare to fight whatever is angering me. Anyways, Ekman is well known, and he brought to our literature, psychological literature in this case, those definitions of emotions by studying isolated culture. For example, he studied the four people of Papua New Guinea, and really interesting for all of us now talking about it is that Ekman, showed that those individuals, as isolated as they were, they had the same facial expressions for those basic emotions that we talked about. So, just to recap, emotions, according to Ekman, are innate, right? Anywhere in the world. It's not subject to a given culture, but they are also biologically driven, and its expression is seen universally. And they are therefore experienced internally, they affect your body, and they can be seen by somebody else. And this is really the three components according to Paul Ekman. And I just wanted to share with you that those research findings on emotions includes six basic emotions. And I bring here because I've studied emotions before, studying the book by Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, and I always reference four basic emotions until I watched a interesting animated movie, right? But back to the six emotions, Ekman brought forth those basic emotions are happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and he adds surprise. The movie that I'm referencing, I'm sure you all are already thinking about, are Inside Out and Inside Out 2. And in Inside Out 2, which enters disgust, right? Brings five of the six basic emotions, with surprise not being part of that storyline. And I love it. I love it that such a easy to absorb, to understand, and to be touched by that movie. Inside Out really shows those universal emotions, right? The movie shows those distinct but rather universal feelings that and I hope I'm not spoiling. As a spoiler alert, I'm not spoiling the end of the movie. I hope I'm not. But anyways, the movie shows Riley, the teenager who's the main character, and her reactions, which, like those theory, really brings that biologically programmed and quite cross-cultural emotions. The movie was a hit in many different countries, including the US, where I am from, and where I live right now, actually, and where the movie was created. Incidentally, the same movie reflects another theory by Ekman, which is how those facial expressions and behaviors are seen and express those emotions. For example, right, the characters show clear, exaggerated facial expressions and behaviors that align quite well. For example, fear, jumpy, cautious, anger blows up literally in the movie. Disgust, the little character, and I can see it in my mind's eye right now, right? He shows distaste and sarcasm. It is so teenage like in many cases. Sadness is tearful and droopy, and joy is always smiling, glowing, and optimistic. The third component, just so that we wrap up our uh, discussion on the movie, those physiological and behavior responses are seen in the movie. How, for example, the emotional landscape of Riley affect memory, affect decisions, affect body posture, and they really mirror those research on physiological and behavioral components by Ekman. So I'm just going to say it. I'm making a pitch, I know, but I am really inviting all of you who has not seen Inside Out. It is truly an accessible engaging way to visualize the theory of basic emotions. And it simplifies the science behind what we're talking about it to all of us as broad and ageless, right, as possible. And the good thing about it is that it is quite true to the core psychological ideas about how emotions shape our thoughts, which is the topic of our discussion, but also our memories and behaviors. So we just keep moving here. I want to talk now about we talking about emotions, psychological and broadly defined, but how does emotion, how are they defined from a spiritual perspective? I mentioned that the book that inspired this talk was written by Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, and from his perspective, which is part of the Spiritist perspective on emotions, he really tells us that emotions are much more than just a biological and psychological phenomena. So I'm saying, Marcia, why did you spend so much time talking to about something that is it's not what we want to talk about, but it is. It's really let's keep on adding to what we understand in terms of emotion. So according to Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, emotions are vibrational manifestations of the spirit's inner state, right? So, as such, as those vibrational manifestations, they are shaped by my thought, my moral development, and they act as energetic expression that will influence both my spiritual and physical bodies. So this is quite important, right? And according to the Spiritist literature, including Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, there are several key elements around uh, definitions of emotions. For example, one topic is, and I would say five. So, number one is that emotions reflect the spiritual condition. What do I mean? What I mean by that is that emotions mirror our spirit's current level of evolution, our current level of, say, a balance or maturity. Are we okay? If not, how not okay or how distraught am I at this moment? And that really reflects where I am at any given moment as an expression of where I am in my entire spiritual growth, my path, and responding to those elements. Manuel Filomeno de Miranda makes quite an interesting analogy. He speaks about a paragraph and a half in a very small chapter. He makes this analogy that emotions are like a candle, and as such, emotions, like the candle, have a function, right? They have a goal. In the case of the candle, it is to provide light. And Manuel Filomeno de Miranda says, despite the fact that it has a goal, it has a function, like a candle, it can be misused, it can burn out, right? Another second element is that thoughts direct our emotions. Now we start to make that correlation between emotions and thoughts. Our thoughts is almost like they are the conductor or maybe a steering wheel they lead, they direct, and the emotion is either the force or the fuel, if you will, of a vehicle. So it's interesting because we are taught that our disciplined thoughts, right, our educated, our controlled thoughts have the potential to elevate or refine our emotions. So you can see one, the thought guides how the emotional response is expressed. At the same time, Manoel Philomeno de Miranda cautions us that at the same time that the thought can elevate our spiritual response, negative, repetitive thoughts will distort our emotional response and create what he calls a spiritual dissonance. And I just have to bring up a little bit of statistics that is very interesting to me. And I'm always surprised when even thinking or confronted with the findings of the research. It's a few years old, 2020, but the latest research on the quantification of the number of thoughts an average person has in its waking hours. And depending on the methodology, it can be 6,000 all the way to 70,000 unique thoughts per day, right? And I'm like, excuse me? Well, so let's go down to 6,000, the lower end of that research finding. And at that point, 6,000 thoughts per day means that I have a new thought every 10 seconds. And I can only imagine where have we all been while I'm talking right now, right? And it's really important measure to highlight to us the importance of mental discipline, especially from this spiritual psychological perspective. But back, I told you I had 5 points, like key elements, and the third key point is that our emotions from a spiritual perspective are part of our energetic field, also called in spiritism our psychosphere. So, what does it mean? Well, our emotions radiate and interact with our energetic field around us, and as such, they will attract. Um, through the laws of magnetism, spirits, they will attract influences that are in with the law of resonance on the same vibrational frequency as our emotions. So this is very interesting, and to be quite simplistic about it, but healthy emotions create a healthy psychosphere, whereas a destructive, negative emotion will lead to a very toxic or sick psychosphere. The fourth point, when we talk about emotions from a spiritual perspective, is that just like I said, the destructive or negative emotions will lead to a toxic energetic field. Emotions influence our well being by making us healthy or sick. So they do that because they affect not only our psychosphere, but they also affect our perispirit or our spiritual body. And through that, it will then reflect in our physical body. So back to that anxiety, right? If we are experiencing, say, prolonged anxiety or prolonged hatred or even prolonged, and we're all subject to that, right? Moments of grief, grieving for a loss of a loved one or even an aspect of our lives. Those prolonged type of emotions can lead to some somatic symptoms and spiritual obsessions, and from a physical, psychological perspective, can lead to pathological um, types of states. And this is something that we should all start to really pay attention, right? My emotional landscape will or not lead to my well being. And the fifth element, which is good news to everyone, emotions can be educated. And the education is a term that we see a lot in many different books, including, for example, Joanna DeAngelis, but they can be educated and transmuted. So what we mean by that is that through spiritual education, through inner transformation, more renewal, prayer, meditation, conscious thought redirection, all of our emotional responses can be transformed. And this is important to understand because we're here, and this is really important for me to highlight. We're here not to advocate an exercise of emotional repression, but we're talking about how we can consciously refine those emotional responses by channeling emotion toward higher purposes. Manuel Philomeno de Miranda cautions us that emotions, like the candle in his analogy, must be used purposefully. So he tells us that if left recklessly, like for example, burning from both sides, right, the both ends of the candle, they will consume your energy rapidly. And, poetic license here, leave you in the darkness. So, to recap, emotions are not our enemies. They're not to be repressed. They're not also instincts to be indulged, but they're tools that should and could be educated. They should be aligned with our divine laws. They should be also directed by enlightened thought, for example, toward peace, self awareness, spiritual growth, mindfulness, etc., etc. So, if we think about it, emotions are really critical for our spiritual evolution. They reflect our inner world, and they also are influenced by how I am morally and mentally. So, an example is that if we were to think about someone constantly, I don't know, chasing desires, right? I want a new job, I want a new relationship, I want to buy this or that. Yet, if being totally honest, regardless of their ability to get what they want, most of them, answering the original question, are left experiencing feelings of emptiness because they are driven by this desire to fulfill an instinct versus really educating what is it that I desire, why do I desire, and what is my emotional responses. So I wanted to really bring that to us because it's important for us to reflect. As we keep going here, I just wanted to bring the idea that for all of us to ponder what is the role of thought in guiding our emotions. And Spiritist teachings, they emphasize that thought is the origin of all actions. It doesn't matter, they can be internal, like our emotional response, or external, like our behaviors. But again, I have some key points for us to further explain. But there's some key points that, for example, if I were to make an analogy with a vehicle, right? Again, I said that the thought is the steering wheel and the emotion is the engine. And what do I mean by that is that we left without guidance, emotions can lead to a very turbulent path, right? It can be really unpredictable where you go. But, anyways, I'm talking about some elements for us to consider, and they are on the screen. The first one is the fact that thought is creative and has that vibrational capability, as we talked before. So, Spiritism teaches that thought is indeed a living force, and they generate as such that vibratory field that will influence the thinker, but also the spiritual environment. We call this the psychosphere. And just to pave the way to our conclusions here, it simply means that what you think will attract spirits, right? Will attract anything that resonate with your vibration, which can either elevate us or disturb us in our emotional response, our emotional state. I would like to bring here beautiful words by Andre Luis, because he, in the book Missionaries of the Light, he tells us that simply, so few words, the thought is everything in life, right? So, not for the faint of heart. The second element for us to consider is that emotions follow the direction of thought, right? Not the other way around. Emotions, they are then consider results or consequences of our mental attitudes. Again, if my thoughts are elevated, if they're peaceful, if they're loving, my emotions are responsive for harmony and peace accordingly. My negative, again, a judgment of our Western society of today's world, negative emotions as fear, hatred, or even envy, for example, they are seen, spiritually speaking, as leading imbalanced or misguided thoughts. Hope it makes sense for you. The third point that I would like to bring here is the moral and emotional evolution, because Spiritism views emotional development as part of our moral and spiritual progress, right? So if we start to say emotions, thought guiding emotion, and emotion really is part of how I, as an immortal spirit, progress, they start to walk really side by side. So as such, we have to start to understand that if we cultivate, if we really spend time in a spectrum of thoughts that I'm sorry, of emotions that lead to, from one hand, positive, altruistic, constructive thoughts, we gradually transform our emotional patterns, and it start to become quite organic. So we move away from just instinctual reactions to things to enlightened response to the same. Um, the fourth element, which is about our responsibility for our inner life. We, each one of us, are responsible for the content as well as the direction of our thoughts, which, when we do that, they affect, it is very important for us to be conscious of it, but in turn, they affect our spiritual health and our emotional well being. And this really aligns with the idea of that mental discipline as taught in many different works, including thought in life or no solar. And an example that I would like to bring here is if we were to imagine now no longer anxiety, but a person feeling just anger, right? And I know somebody, I'm thinking of him, a very dear person to me, but this person, since he was born, he is an angry man, right? And if we think about it, this just this anger toward on a daily basis, it is really key for us to understand, compassionately so, that that anger or that anger response usually does not arise in a vacuum. It is probably stemmed from repeated thoughts of, oh, judgment, pride, even this self centered way of looking at the world, like the world owes me this or that. So, thinking of the same person, in a very southern way, bless his heart, right? If the person consciously redirect his thoughts toward, now, let me see the situation, let me understand the situation, let me demonstrate compassion or even my own humility to not understand all the aspects of the situation. It is very interesting because their emotional state will begin to shift almost automatically. So it's awesome when we think that, right, that our thoughts, excuse me, our thoughts, I need to mute myself, my apologies. Yuri, I'm talking too much. Let me put another. I am back. Maybe my voice is not back 100%. My apologies. I'm talking about the angry man, right? The angry person. So let's think about how our thoughts guide our emotions, and they also build spiritual connections. And in fact, they will mold our future, right? In this life or in a later um, in a later life. But let's keep on going. My apologies for my voice. Wanted to, and I already alerted to us previously, but let us be aware of the dangers, right? We are alerted by many authors, spiritist authors, on the dangers of repressed emotion or the undisciplined emotions. Um, when we study spiritual psychology, particularly in the works by Joanna DeAngelis, and her works, again, is through the mediumship of Divaldo Franco, they deeply address this theme of repressed or undisciplined emotions. So, what am I talking about? What is Joanna DeAngelis talking about? She mentions that emotional repression will lead to inner conflicts, it will lead to suffering, and for us to really reach healing from that emotional repression, it will require courage, it will require discipline, it will require self-awareness, integration, and a commitment to our spiritual development. Why am I saying this? Well, if we were to again to use a day-to-day analogy, we're saying that repressing our emotions is almost like sealing a pressure cooker. It doesn't matter how long it takes, it will eventually explode. Beware, everyone. And she also talks about undisciplined emotions. So we need to think about that, how those undisciplined um, emotions, they will drain our spiritual energy, and eventually our physical health will be impacted. So, for example, um, if I am a person who is grieving, right? But I am suppressing my ability to whatever emotional response, be it tears or even anger or sadness, whatever it is, my emotional response to the grief, I may develop some physical ailments or even depression. So it's very important. Another metaphor, this is really silly, but it may help us through, is visually speaking, if we picture a house, right, with faulty wiring, and the faulty wiring is thoughts, right? They're submitting all the signals, but it's faulty, and the lights as our emotions will flicker or even short circuit. Oh, I know, terrible analogy. My apologies. But back to Joanna De Angelis, she really blends her approach to talking about emotion through spiritual wisdom and, of course, using depth psychology. And she really talks about the evolution of the self and the integration of the shadow aspects. Okay, so shadow aspects, which, really we're linking now with repressed emotions. I- According to Joanna in her thoughts, those are my words, but those repressed emotions can become psychic toxins, right? And she talks a lot about how when they accumulate in our unconscious, they start to manifest as anxiety, depression, neurosis, or even physical illnesses. She also talks about undisciplined emotions like that uncontrolled anger. So, yes, somebody stepped on my toes. Yes, my toe is. Just healing from a, I don't know, I'm become making this really caricaturesque here, but I had a surgery. I did something with my foot, and somebody boom steps on my toe. Yes, I feel pain, but I have an uncontrollable anger. I start to yell, screaming it with all my heart, my voice. I break everything because I'm so angry. That's an uncontrolled anger type. Or in many cases, we know stories of uncontrolled jealousy, uncontrolled fear. And she says those undisciplined emotions, they stem from unconscious drives and reflect our spiritual immaturity. So, from that perspective, Joanna de Angelis invites us all to really educate our emotions. And beautifully said in her books, many of her books, she teaches that we can do that when we invest in self knowledge, we invest in our moral development, but also meditation, prayer, and what she calls spiritual discipline. Joanna's words is good for me to read to you. She says in the book Plenitude, the individual who represses emotions and avoids facing inner conflicts delays their evolutionary journey. Whoa, right? I wanted to bring somebody that is dear to Joanna de Angelis, called Gustav Jung, because Jung saw the human being as one that is seeking wholeness. He calls about the integration, right? The individuation and integrated being. And when he speaks to that, he says that for you to become whole, it really means that you are required, you must integrate both conscious and unconscious states, and that includes your repressed emotions. And Jung, he talks about the shadow, but he also, something that is important to me is to think that he tells us that these emotions, repressed as they are, they don't disappear. Remember the pressure cooker analogy, right? They indeed become autonomous complexes, and as such, they can hijack our behavior, they can lead to emotional disturbance, or in his case of Jungian psychology, right? He references in a lot of his books how dream and projections can bring those shadow elements, those repressed emotions. And the other thing that he says that I would like to share here is that healing, right, comes through the process of individuation, which is the same thing, the process of integrating the shadow or our repressed emotions and becoming whole, conscious and unconscious, right? And I just wanted to maybe finalize my thoughts on this topic right now is that both Joanna DeAngelis and Carl Gustav Jung, they view emotional repression as a major barrier to our personal and spiritual growth. And both of them teach us that we should be brave enough, that we should be encouraged to confront ourselves, to go into this journey inward, to face, to confront, to understand, and finally to integrate our emotions rather than succumbing to fear and suppressing them. For Joanna, it's all about this moral and spiritual imperative that is tied to the concepts of reincarnation and the law of progress. For Jung, he calls this a psychological necessity for wholeness and meaning in our lives. So, with that, I would like, we're approaching the end of our time together, and just wanted to spend a few more minutes talking about, we talked about thought, we talked about the emotion, we talked about how they interact, we talked about the dangers of repressing them. So now it's time for me to bring to us the idea of how can we have a healthy emotional life through thought, right? And so I brought some teachings from spiritual teachers, and they all bring the key theme here of healthy emotional life. And when we look at the works again by Joanna de Angelis, but also of Manoel Philomeno de Miranda and Andre Luiz, along with some of the teachings by Carl Gustav Jung, we start to converge on the importance of self knowledge, emotional integration, and spiritual maturity as the three sides of the area that we need to sink our teeth on. But Joanna de Angelis specifically, she brings to us this emotional education and inner illumination, and she teaches that emotional discipline is critical, is essential for us to evolve. Some of her key practice to get to that sense of involvement, evolutionary growth, right? She talks about self observation or self knowledge, right? Which is having or cultivating regular introspection or reflections to understand what our emotional triggers, what our unconscious motivations to that led in the past or is leading to so and so emotion response. So when beyond the that observation and reflection, she also talks about emotional re-education, simply meaning let's just replace if I having the so-called, and I say so-called because there's a lot of books and articles about how what we judge as positive versus negative emotional, basic emotions especially, they have changed and shifted throughout the centuries, right? So again, replace the so-called negative emotional patterns, maybe fear, resentment, jealousy, with virtues, right? With qualities, with a good emotional response like compassion, patience. That Joanna D'Angelo is known for her, what she, her lesson, right, on patience, serenity as well. Another practice that she teaches us is actually mindfulness and meditation. And simply put, she invites us to practice and foster inner silence, because it will help you and me, all of us, disidentify ourselves with reactive emotions. So it's super cool. You can read more, but it her message often leads to that. Let's be mindful. Let's be present. Let us meditate to understand: is that really me, or is it a emotional response that I can control? And finally, what we call about moral discipline is understanding that we, yes, 6,000 thoughts a day, yes, but we can choose our thoughts, and we can choose our behaviors, our actions, our words, and we can choose to align those thoughts and our behaviors with love, with forgiveness, with humility, with truth, for instance. So in the book Plenitude, Jonah D'Angelo tells us that healthy emotions are the result of disciplined thought and a mind illuminated by the light of the spirits. That is just beautiful. I'd like to bring Carl Gustav Jung. I know he is not considered a spiritual teacher, but he's often referenced by Joanna de Angelis. But Carl Gustav Jung teaches about integration and individuation. I mentioned already him, but it's really interesting for us to think about, because he believed that emotions must be confronted, right? And his key practices include shadow work, where if we decide to do shadow work with a psychoanalyst, for example, you can then explore and accept the parts of yourself that you are consciously or mostly unconsciously denying or rejecting. Could be anger, could be envy, could be many different emotions, or how you respond to things in your lives. But shadow work is usually done through dream analysis or journaling. Another practice by Carl Gustav Jung is active imagination, which is, in so many words, engaging with your inner symbols and images, such as your dreams, your fantasies, and through them engage to understanding emotional dynamics, so that you're able to release some energy that may be blocked. So, active imagination. He also talks about individuation process, which is, in so many words, the path to wholeness through the integration of opposites. I love it, right? Because we are a live a dual perspective of life, right? And we're going to be into the uno mundus concept of a one, not two opposites. So, what are those? For example, conscious, unconscious, reason, emotion, persona, shadow, so on and so forth. Finally, Carl Gustav Jung talks about symbolic understanding done via interpreting our emotional conflicts. And those conflicts are part of our inner journey toward achieving meaning and purpose in life. So, a beautiful quote by Carl Gustav Jung is that emotion is the chief source of becoming conscious, right? So, you use that so that you become aware, become conscious, and you really become purposeful and have a meaningful life. And Carl Gustav Jung continues, there can be no transforming of darkness into light without emotion. I love that quote, beautifully said. Um, finally, not finally, I have two more. Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, which is the book that inspired us to be here today. When he talks about emotional vigilance and also responsibility, as a spiritual author, he's really much of his work is concerned with obsession, spiritual disturbance, but because of that, he now focuses on emotional discipline as a source of protection and even his word spiritual hygiene. So, from that perspective, he recommends us to practice mental vigilance, right? Which is simply a awareness of what are our thoughts, what our feelings are they being influenced by external negative entities, spirits, or not. He recommends prayer. He recommends moral alignment, which really means have really reach for high moral standards and prayer to keep us attuned to the elevated spiritual energies. He also tells us to avoid emotional contamination. What we mean by that is really guard ourselves against environments or even company that are stimulants for our uncontrolled emotions. Some of the uncontrolled emotions that he talks about may be rage, that uncontrolled anger, but could be arrogance, unbridled pride or sensuality, etc. The other one that he talks about is as a key practice for our emotional well-being is assistance to others, and I love that he says that we can cultivate our empathy through charity, because doing that it actually helps us purify our spirit to uplift as well our emotional field. And a beautiful quote by, and this is translation, local translation, right? In one of his books, he says, Manuel Philomeno de Miranda says that every emotional imbalance is a vibrational call that opens psychic channels to spiritual affinity for good or ill. So it's just that. Let us be aware of how we are feeling from an emotional perspective and be aware that we may be opening ourselves to influences that may be not so good for us. And finally, Andre Luis, he speaks a lot about thought emotion, right? Synergy and how they impact our spiritual health. And he explains, Andre Luis, that there are energetic consequences of our emotions in this spiritual body or the perispirit. So, what do I need to do to make sure that I don't get sick because of my emotions, right? Control. This is Andre Luis, not me saying control your thoughts, control your feelings, your emotional response to those thoughts. And he says that since thought is a creative force, the emotional discipline begins with focused thinking, positive thinking, so on and so forth. He recommends that we, like Manuel Philomeno de Miranda, that we devote daily selflessness activities or daily service, right? He mentioned that emotional health improves whenever we are working with charitable types of work, because at that point we shift our egoic desires into helping the other. So, right there in the middle of working for whatever reason, in whatever type of charitable work, you are always we're immediately becoming healthier just from that shift. And finally, he talks about fluidic and energetic awareness, right? He does say that we are surrounded by the mental and emotional vibrations we emit. And when he says that, we read that as the fact that our emotions do alter our spiritual field, and whenever we nourish toxic emotions, we are actually harming our health, our well-being, as well as attracting a spiritual interference. Whew, a lot in just an hour. I'm here to say thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you. And just for all of us, let us think and reflect that a healthy emotional life is not about never feeling those so called negative emotions, but it is really all about us understanding, guiding, and even transforming them into tools for our personal growth, our spiritual well being, our psychological maturity. With that, Yuri, I am really looking forward to have you back to the front stage, right? And how's everything? I hope this discussion was a good one for you. To me, it's such an honor to be able to talk about this topic.
No, thank you so much, Marcia. It was really great. I
Uh,
love this, the concepts that you brought. You also mixed psychology with spiritism. You really highlighted how the thoughts interconnect with emotions, and gave practical tips, especially towards the end. So it's always important, as we always say here in the Seeds of Knowledge, how we can apply the knowledge that we receive here. So I really appreciate that.
uh-huh.
And would you be so kind as to do a final prayer for us today?
Of course. And I would just say thank you. Thank you, Yudi. Thank you, all of you who are here with us today. And if we may, we can close your eyes. I will close mine. But let us just take this brief second together to be united. Be united in Christ, our Master Jesus, and all the beautiful teachings that we have received so many years ago, 2000 plus years ago. Those teachings, like many of the teachings that we talk today from spiritual authors, they're here to elevate our awareness so that we, as masters of our own destiny, can select what to think and how to react, emotionally speaking, to those thoughts. May we be guided by the light that shines from above. May all of us be blessed, not only with learning and the spiritual wisdom that are available to us through many, many different sources, books, and channels, YouTube channels, or many other forms to access information. But may we all be touched within our emotional framework to feel peace and balance and love, most important, love. May we all have a wonderful rest of the day or afternoon or night, depending where you are, whenever you watch this. And so be it.
So be it. Thank you so much. And for those who are watching us, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.